5:42 hours, November 12, 1984. The concrete walls of Berlin's U-Bahn maintenance corridor reflected the dim glow of overhead fluorescent lights. A metallic glint, fleeting and almost imperceptible, caught the eye of a solitary observer. The object rested near a junction of pipes and cables, partially obscured by the shadows of a support beam. To any casual passerby, it might have appeared as debris, discarded in routine neglect. Yet for one mid-level administrative clerk in the Ministry of Transportation, trained by habit to note the small and unusual, it registered as an anomaly. At this hour, the station was silent, except for the faint hum of ventilation systems and the distant rumble of the city above. The clerk's workday began much earlier, following a regimented schedule that had been unaltered for over 5 years. Each morning, they boarded the U-Bahn at precisely 5:15, choosing the same car, occupying the same window seat, and observing a predictable rhythm of commuters. The clerk's attention to detail extended beyond professional necessity. It was ingrained through routine observation, a vigilance honed over years of documenting memos, delivery logs, and personnel movements within the ministry. Every item, every interaction, was cataloged internally, in mental spreadsheets constructed to monitor efficiency and detect administrative irregularities. The ministry itself was a labyrinth of gray carpeting, beige partitions, and the faint scent of industrial-grade cleaning agents. Office corridors were narrow, lined with filing cabinets, whose drawers held decades of municipal transport records. Typewriters clattered methodically in adjacent rooms, punctuated by the occasional hum of fax machines transmitting bureaucratic information across town. In the early hours, these sounds were punctuated by the arrival of maintenance crews and postal deliveries, each following rigidly scheduled routes that the clerk had memorized. Even minor deviations, an envelope arriving 2 minutes late, an elevator stopping on an unassigned floor, were noted silently, sometimes with a small mark in the notebook kept specifically for anomalies. Routine extended into the minutiae of daily tasks. At 6:02, the clerk unlocked a metal filing cabinet containing service logs from the previous day. Each file was dated, numbered, and stamped with a procedural mark verifying its accuracy. By 6:15, the clerk had logged all arrivals and departures of service vehicles, noting anomalies. A van that bypassed its usual checkpoint, a maintenance worker who lingered at a service entrance, or the uncharacteristic absence of a supervisor during routine inspections. These minor irregularities were cataloged as part of a personal habit, rather than any suspicion of espionage. By 6:45, the first wave of office personnel arrived. The clerk observed the cadence of footsteps, the patterns of movement between departments, and the subtle interactions among coworkers. A janitor's early morning route was noted. Stops at precise intervals, gestures toward electrical panels, and the occasional glance toward the service corridor. A colleague in the records department arrived with a package, placing it on a counter before leaving without comment. Each observation was accompanied by a timestamp in the clerk's notebook. 6:47, 6:51, 6:53. Micro details like the tilt of a briefcase, the angle at which a newspaper obscured part of a package, or the repeated glance toward stairwell, were meticulously recorded. Outside the ministry, Berlin's early morning was similarly regimented. Trams followed established routes, bicycles and pedestrians adhered to traffic signals, and street vendors opened shutters at consistent times. The clerk walking to the office had long memorized patterns. The exact moment a tram would pass the corner at Köpenickstrasse, the number of cyclists who preferred the eastbound lane, and the daily rotation of municipal trucks servicing local streets. These observations, trivial to most, formed a mental grid against which any deviation could be measured. On this particular morning, the anomaly in the maintenance corridor drew attention. The metallic glint, later identified as a small unmarked case, was neither scheduled for delivery nor documented in any municipal record. The clerk paused at 5:44 to make a note, the exact location, the orientation relative to the nearest support beam, and the approximate dimensions. The case was not moved, touched, or opened. The observation was procedural, document, note, continue. Yet in retrospect, This moment marked the first discernible break in the otherwise seamless routine of ordinary life. The clerk's day continued according to established patterns. At 7:02, they began sorting interdepartmental memos, aligning correspondence by date and subject. By 7:30, service reports were cross-referenced with delivery logs from the previous week. Minor discrepancies were noted. A van listed in the log as departing at 6:15 had not been logged as returned until 6:51. A maintenance worker's badge showed no record of entry for the assigned time. Each anomaly was documented methodically, without assumption, but with the awareness that repeated deviations, if correlated, might indicate systemic irregularities. By mid-morning, the clerk had constructed a preliminary internal map. Service routes, delivery patterns, elevator logs, and access schedules for maintenance personnel. This map extended beyond the physical layout to include temporal sequences, the predictable duration of corridor inspections, the frequency of phone calls routed through internal lines, and the expected interval between deliveries. Every item was measured against historical patterns, allowing the clerk to identify outliers with increasing confidence. The narrative emphasis during this early period is deliberate. There is no immediate crisis, no confrontation, and no overt threat. Tension exists as a latent quality, embedded in the routine and the micro-observations. Small details, the glint of metal, a brief pause by a pedestrian, an unregistered delivery, serve as initial signals in a pattern that has yet to emerge. The observer's meticulous note-taking, mental mapping, and attention to temporal sequences form the foundation for the investigative procedures that will follow. By the close of the morning at 11:45, the clerk pauses at a window overlooking the U-Bahn tracks. Trains pass at intervals of exactly 4 minutes, each car carrying passengers with predictable behaviors. The sunlight slants through the station skylights, illuminating dust motes and the worn concrete of the platforms. The glint of the case in the maintenance corridor earlier that day remains in memory, an unresolved element in the otherwise rigidly observed world. Its presence, subtle yet persistent, represents the intrusion of the unaccounted for into an ordered system. The final hours of this section focus on internal reflection. The clerk records observations with the same clinical precision as before, yet with heightened awareness. Every action, every pause, every slight deviation in routine is noted. This is not curiosity in the conventional sense. It is procedural vigilance, the habit of cataloging the world in a way that anticipates irregularity. The ordinary day continues, yet beneath the surface, a subtle tension begins to take hold. The stage is set for the intrusion of suspicion, for the emergence of a pattern that will draw ordinary life into the realm of intelligence, secrecy, and Cold War uncertainty. Section 1 concludes with the clerk leaving the office at 17:30, noting minor anomalies in the day's operations. An unclaimed package near a service elevator, a maintenance worker lingering at an unusual time, and the faint echo of footsteps in a deserted corridor. These observations, insignificant in isolation, represent the seeds of an investigative thread that will unfold over the coming weeks. The ordinary routine has been interrupted, if only slightly, by the first glimmer of broken silence. By November 15, 1984, 3 days after the initial metallic glint had caught the clerk's attention, subtle anomalies began to recur with regularity. The clerk, whose observational habits had been refined over years of municipal work, noted these repetitions with heightened scrutiny. At 6:07, as the first train passed the Kopenicker platform, a maintenance worker appeared near a junction that the clerk had previously marked for irregular activity. The worker paused for precisely 21 seconds, glanced toward the stairwell leading to the storage corridor, and then proceeded along a predetermined path. The clerk recorded the sequence with exact timestamps. 6 hours 7 minutes and 21 seconds. Pause, 6 hours 7 minutes and 42 seconds. Glance, 6 hours 8 minutes and 3 seconds. Movement resumed. Patterns began to emerge. Over the next week, the clerk observed 3 similar pauses at the same location by different personnel. A janitor would occasionally stop, inspect a service panel, and replace a small unmarked envelope, always within the same corridor segment. Delivery vans approached the area at irregular intervals, some departing earlier than logged, some lingering longer than permitted by routine. Each discrepancy was meticulously noted. Vehicle registration numbers, precise times of arrival and departure, and the order of personnel interactions. The civilians' approach was methodical. Rather than drawing attention to anomalies immediately, they cross-referenced these events with historical data. Logs from the past 6 months revealed no precedent for such patterns. The clerk maintained a handwritten ledger. Dates, times, observed objects, personnel identifiers, and environmental conditions. By November 22nd, these records had grown to over 50 entries, spanning multiple locations and times a day. Each entry was coded with an alphanumeric key corresponding to the clerk's internal mapping system, allowing for rapid comparison and trend recognition. A particularly notable incident occurred on November 24, 1984, 1836. A commuter briefly placed a small, unmarked package atop a ledge near the southern maintenance exit. The clerk, positioned inconspicuously on the opposite platform, observed the object for 12 minutes. The commuter left without touching the package again, but within 5 minutes, a janitor approached, retrieved the envelope, and carried it into a storage corridor normally restricted to cleaning staff. This sequence, precisely timed, suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Quiet tension began to accumulate. Each repeated anomaly introduced a psychological weight, the type that is common in intelligence observation. The mind parses patterns, correlates incomplete data, and anticipates future movements. At November 25, 7:02, the clerk adjusted their morning route, taking the adjacent platform and observing the maintenance corridor from a different angle. This slight variation revealed additional details: the exact placement of the package relative to structural beams, the cadence of footsteps, and the brief eye contact exchange between the janitor and an unknown commuter. Overlapping patterns became evident when time-stamped observations were charted. By November 27th, the clerk had created a micro-timeline spanning several days. 5:42, metallic glint noted. 6:07, maintenance pause. 1836, package retrieved. 1848, stairwell traversal by unidentified commuter. Mapping these events revealed recurring intervals, typically 4 to 6 hours apart, and suggested that deliveries and handoffs followed an operational schedule unknown to municipal records. As the week progressed, the clerk's attention extended to environmental signals. Fluorescent lights occasionally flickered near the corridor, unconnected to scheduled maintenance. Electrical panels showed minor anomalies in power draw. Shadows in the tunnel shifted in ways inconsistent with natural light or train movement. Even seemingly mundane details, a newspaper placed over a corner of a package, a briefcase rotated slightly before pickup, were logged, and each minor irregularity was measured against the timeline. By November 29, 1984, the clerk had implemented a personal surveillance plan. Observations were now systematic, spanning multiple times a day. Arrival times at the station were varied: 5:12, 5:21, 5:29, allowing for comparison of commuter flow, delivery patterns, and corridor traffic. Notes included vehicle descriptions down to model and license plate suffixes, personnel positions relative to architectural features, and minute behaviors, such as hand placement on railing or angle of gaze. The notebook, once a simple record of municipal activity, had become a detailed repository of operational micropatterns. Incremental anomalies escalated suspicion. A new pattern involved a briefcase left on a platform bench at 6:15 for exactly 8 minutes before retrieval. Observed twice by the clerk on consecutive days, the briefcase contained documents that appeared deliberately concealed: folded papers with no visible writing externally, sealed envelopes, and objects that suggested coded communication. The clerk noted external features: paper texture, fold angles, and envelope condition. Observations were limited to visual and temporal data. At no point was the object handled. The psychological dimension of prolonged observation is critical. The clerk began to anticipate movements, predicting with growing accuracy when personnel would pause, when vehicles would arrive, and when packages would appear. By December 1st, 1984, 1749, the clerk could project likely locations of subsequent anomalies with a degree of certainty sufficient to adjust their own positioning. The tension is cumulative, built not from confrontation, but from the anticipation of irregular events in the midst of ordinary routines. By early December, the clerk's internal analysis included comparative tables and spatial mapping. Columns included date, time, vehicle identifier, pedestrian identifier, object type, environmental conditions, and interaction notes. Entries were color-coded to distinguish recurring anomalies from isolated deviations. The chart revealed correlations. The same maintenance corridor repeatedly served as a nexus for unlogged activity. Specific delivery vehicles were present for multiple minor anomalies, and certain individuals, janitors, commuters, and occasional administrative personnel, appeared at both regular and irregular intervals. The escalation is procedural, not dramatic. No confrontation occurs, no alarms are raised. Instead, the clerk establishes a low-risk monitoring system, alternating vantage points, precise time logging, and repeated verification of events against previously recorded patterns. At December 3rd, 6:15, this method yields the first partially coordinated sequence of events. A delivery van stops outside the northern entrance. A janitor retrieves a package from a platform. An unidentified commuter moves in synchrony with the janitor before disappearing into the stairwell. Each action is recorded, measured, and entered into the ledger with exact timestamps. 6 hours 15 minutes and 22 seconds, van arrival. 6 hours 15 minutes and 57 seconds, janitor retrieves package. 6 hours 16 minutes and 8 seconds, commuter departs. These incremental, meticulously documented observations transition the clerk from passive observer to proactive investigator. Suspicion solidifies, supported by quantifiable data. The repetitive nature of anomalies, corroborated across multiple days, signals coordination and intentional concealment. This pattern recognition is critical. It demonstrates that the anomalies are not random deviations in routine, but part of an organized system, suggesting a broader intelligence operation. By December 4th, 1984, the clerk begins to plan further observation with even greater precision. Routes are adjusted to maintain cover while maximizing visibility. Vantage points are rotated to capture interactions from multiple angles. Photographic documentation is considered, though limited by available equipment. Even minor adjustments in timing are deliberate, arriving 1 minute early or late to confirm the recurrence of previously observed sequences, or lingering slightly longer near junctions to measure pause duration of personnel. The final paragraphs of this section emphasize the quiet tension. The clerk, now fully engaged, perceives each minor irregularity as a potential signal. Packages left unclaimed, vehicles lingering beyond log times, and personnel performing repeated, patterned actions collectively indicate the presence of deliberate intelligence activity. By correlating observations over time, the civilian identifies operational rhythms, arrival, placement, retrieval, and departure, all within precise, repeatable sequences. Suspicion has fully replaced routine. What began as a minor glint of metal in a maintenance corridor has evolved into a structured investigative effort, grounded in meticulous observation, temporal precision, and pattern recognition. The clerk's methods mirror those of trained intelligence analysts, detailed logging, cross-referencing, and low-profile monitoring. Yet the scope remains limited. The full scale of the operation is unknown. Still, the stage is set for escalation, for the transition from civilian observation to formal federal investigation. The silent tension of repeated anomalies permeates every corridor, every platform, and every recorded observation. December 3rd, 1984, 19:15 hours. The clerk, following the meticulously established observation schedule, positioned themselves near the southern maintenance corridor, maintaining an unobtrusive vantage point behind the stairwell railing. The station was largely deserted at this hour, save for sporadic late commuters and maintenance personnel completing end-of-day tasks. A small, unmarked envelope, previously observed in prior sequences, was placed atop a service bench by an individual whose identity remained unverified. The envelope's placement coincided precisely with prior timing patterns, suggesting deliberate scheduling. The clerk, using only visual observation and temporal notation, recorded each movement with exactitude. 19 hours, 15 minutes, and 4 seconds. Individual approaches bench. 19 hours, 15 minutes, and 11 seconds. Envelope placed. 19 hours, 15 minutes, and 23 seconds. Individual departs. 19 hours, 15 minutes, and 27 seconds. Envelope remained stationary. Minutes later, a janitor arrived, following the same path documented over preceding weeks. The janitor retrieved the envelope in a consistent motion, pausing, scanning the surrounding corridor, and placing the package within a cleaning cart. This action, although seemingly mundane, represented the first fully coordinated interaction captured by the clerk, one that directly indicated the existence of a concealed operational sequence. The clerk documented environmental conditions: fluorescent light flicker at 19 hours 15 minutes and 15 seconds, ventilation hum at 19 hours 15 minutes and 19 seconds, temperature reading of 14.7 degrees Celsius, reinforcing the precision of the observation record. The clerk's next action was procedural, consistent with investigative methodology. Rather than handling the envelope directly, they maintained a clear line of sight while making a mental map of retrieval routes, corridor junctions, stairwell access, elevator entry, and subsequent movement through the ministry's adjacent service tunnels. Aerial schematics, previously memorized, were cross-referenced to ensure coverage of all potential drop points. At 1921, the janitor emerged from a stairwell, card in hand, heading toward the northern utility corridor. The clerk recorded vehicle placement outside the service entrance: a delivery van, license plate suffix 672, engine idling, lights off, position consistent with prior anomalous patterns. By December 4, 1984, 8:05 hours, the clerk had contacted local authorities, providing detailed logs of repeated patterns, timing sequences, and photographic documentation of vehicles and personnel. This marked the initial transition from civilian observation to formal federal involvement. The narrative emphasizes procedural intake. Logs were reviewed by an intake officer, chain of custody forms were prepared for photographic evidence, and preliminary analysis began in a controlled environment. Every photograph, timestamp, and observation note was cataloged, forming the foundation for federal operational assessment. Federal agencies, including the FBI and CIA, coordinated to validate civilian observations. Agents conducted initial background checks on identified personnel and vehicles. The janitor and other observed individuals underwent cross-referencing with employment records, municipal databases, and previous federal surveillance logs. Observed sequences were compared against known tradecraft, dead drop techniques, inconspicuous handoffs, and timed courier movements. Analysts focused on pattern repetition, microbehaviors, and environmental conditions noted by the clerk. By December 5, 1984, 11:32 hours, federal agents had conducted a preliminary physical sweep of the maintenance corridor. Every potential dead drop location was inspected, with measurements taken: bench dimensions, shelf heights, ventilation openings, and stairwell alcoves. Micro-variations were logged: scuff marks on floors, slight abrasions on railings, and faint impressions on surfaces consistent with small packages. These findings corroborated the clerk's records, establishing a procedural link between civilian observation and federal evidence collection. Simultaneously, federal analysts reviewed temporal patterns from the clerk's logs. A timeline was created: November 12th, metallic glint observed; November 24th, package placed by commuter; November 27th, janitor retrieves envelope; December 3rd, coordinated handoff at 1915. Each event was verified against independent surveillance sources: city security cameras, train departure logs, and municipal vehicle monitoring. This triangulation established operational credibility for the civilians' observations. December 6, 1984, 14:17 hours, marked the first significant escalation. A previously unobserved individual, later identified as an auxiliary courier, appeared at the northern service entrance. This person carried a small black briefcase, matching dimensions of prior observed objects. The clerk's documentation included every movement: approach from a street, timing of steps along platform tiles, and interaction with the janitor at 14 hours, 21 minutes, and 3 seconds. Federal agents noted that this sequence indicated multiple coordinated participants, suggesting a broader network rather than isolated anomalies. By mid-December, the stakes had escalated. Evidence indicated a potential intelligence operation, likely foreign in origin. Federal protocols were implemented. Specialized counterintelligence teams monitored the station continuously. Redundant observations were conducted from adjacent streets, and secure communication channels were established for real-time reporting. Analysts examined materials in the recovered envelopes, faint numeric codes, small printed documents, and symbols suggestive of a predetermined cipher system. The narrative emphasizes procedural rigor in evidence handling, photographic documentation under controlled lighting, fingerprint scans of envelope exteriors, and comparative analysis of ink composition. December 8, 1984, 6:42 hours. The clerk observed a new interaction. An envelope placed beneath a metal junction box, retrieved within 3 minutes by an unregistered individual. This event, recorded with precise temporal sequencing, provided federal analysts with critical validation: the existence of a repeated, coordinated, and clandestine exchange network. Analysts cross-referenced this with prior logs, noting correlation between environmental signals, personnel movement, and object placement. The subtlety of the operation was striking. No overt risk was visible, yet the intelligence value was significant. Over the next week, federal analysis focused on corroboration and procedural verification. Multiple drop locations were mapped, distances measured, and visibility assessed. Analysts documented vehicle and pedestrian movements, speed, timing, and environmental interaction. The operational model constructed from civilian observation was validated by federal surveillance. Recurring intervals, specific placement behaviors, and coordination between previously unconnected personnel. Each finding was logged in procedural reports, creating a chain of evidence linking the civilians' observations to operational patterns consistent with intelligence tradecraft. By December 12, 1984, 18:03 hours, federal teams coordinated with a clerk to monitor a high-probability handoff. The civilian maintained observational duties, while agents deployed inconspicuously along potential intercept points. At this stage, coordination emphasized non-interference. Evidence was to be collected without alerting the participants. Timing sequences were critical. 18 hours, 3 minutes, and 11 seconds. Van arrives. 18 hours, 3 minutes, and 47 seconds. Janitor retrieves package. 18 hours, 4 minutes, and 15 seconds. Courier departs corridor. Each observation was documented in real-time logs and subsequently cross-referenced with historical data. The narrative highlights the procedural escalation. What began as isolated civilian observation had now transitioned into a formal counterintelligence operation. Federal agents conducted in-depth interviews with administrative personnel, reviewed employment records, and analyzed environmental variables. All actions were framed in an investigative, documentary style. No confrontation, no dramatized danger, only methodical validation of previously noted anomalies. By the end of Section 3, December 14, 1984, the operation had achieved several key milestones. Federal involvement confirmed the presence of a coordinated exchange network. Multiple assets were identified: the janitor, an auxiliary courier, and unregistered individuals interacting with observed packages. Temporal patterns, route mapping, and procedural analysis confirmed that these interactions were deliberate and consistent with intelligence tradecraft. Yet, the overarching network and the handler responsible for coordination remained unidentified. Section 3 closes with emphasis on procedural tension. The clerk's observations had proven accurate. Federal validation reinforced the significance of prior documentation. Evidence handling, timeline reconstruction, and operational mapping underscored the methodical, non-dramatic escalation from civilian noticing anomalies to federal intervention. The stage is set for detailed surveillance, asset tracking, and interrogation in the following phase, highlighting the meticulous, investigative dimension of Cold War counterintelligence operations. December 10, 1984, 6 o'clock hours. Federal counterintelligence units established a permanent surveillance perimeter along the southern and northern access points of the Berlin maintenance corridor previously documented by the clerk. Observation teams were deployed in staggered intervals to maintain 24-hour coverage, utilizing a combination of stationary vantage points, rooftop positions, and adjacent transit platforms. All positions were equipped with chronometers synchronized to national time signals to ensure absolute precision in recording interactions, movements, and object placements. The surveillance operation began with detailed baseline measurements. Agents mapped every platform, stairwell, utility corridor, and potential dead drop location. Distances between observation points were recorded, including line-of-sight calculations, light conditions, and environmental noise levels. Surveillance teams logged the precise time it took personnel to traverse each corridor segment, noting average walking speed, pauses at intersections, and minor variations between days. These measurements established a reference framework for subsequent anomaly detection. By 6:32, the first asset of interest emerged, a janitor previously documented by the clerk. The individual approached a marked dead drop location, paused for 17 seconds, and retrieved a small envelope placed there the previous evening. Agents documented every movement, exact footsteps per tile, body orientation, hand placement, and envelope retrieval technique. Notes included micro-behaviors, such as repeated glances toward stairwells, consistent with tradecraft designed to detect observation. All details were time-stamped to the second. 6 hours 32 minutes and 11 seconds. Approach. 6 hours 32 minutes and 28 seconds. Pause. 6 hours 32 minutes and 35 seconds. Retrieval complete. A second individual, later identified as a mid-level courier, appeared at 7:05, carrying a black briefcase. This individual moved along a predetermined route, entering via the northern entrance, pausing briefly at a ventilation shaft, and depositing the briefcase at a concealed junction box. Federal agents tracked every step, comparing movement sequences against historical observations from the clerk's logs. The correlation was nearly exact, validating prior civilian documentation and confirming repeated operational behavior consistent with intelligence tradecraft. Each observed sequence was meticulously analyzed. Agents recorded environmental conditions, fluctuating fluorescent lighting, ambient temperature at 13.9 degrees Celsius, ventilation system cycles, and pedestrian traffic patterns. Every observed behavior was logged against time-stamped video feeds, still photography, and handwritten observational notes. This multi-source approach allowed analysts to triangulate positions, verify movement consistency, and identify minor deviations that might indicate adaptation or error in tradecraft execution. By December 12, 1984, federal analysts had established a temporal map of daily operational sequences. Packages and envelopes were consistently placed and retrieved at intervals ranging from 4 to 7 hours. Courier movement patterns revealed a rotational schedule. Different personnel handled each drop, suggesting compartmentalization. Analysts also identified signature behaviors: briefcase tilting, envelope placement angles, glances toward potential observers, and micro-timing delays designed to confirm environmental conditions before handoff. These elements were documented in procedural logs without conjecture, adhering strictly to observed facts. The operation then focused on identification of assets. Biometric analysis, including gait observation and posture assessment, enabled analysts to distinguish between regular personnel and those operating within the covert network. By December 14, 8:17 hours, one courier was positively identified. Male, mid-30s, average height, with prior employment in municipal services. Analysts noted patterns in clothing, footwear, and habitual gestures that facilitated ongoing tracking. Surveillance logs indicated that the individual consistently avoided detection, integrating tradecraft techniques with the ordinary routines of Berlin's commuters. December 15, 1984, 17:42 hours, marked the first major interception. The courier was observed transferring a small envelope to a previously unregistered individual near a stairwell junction. Agents documented each action: approach, placement, pause duration, and departure. The transfer was executed with precision, indicative of formal operational training. Evidence, including the envelope's contents, was confiscated following procedural protocol. Photographs were taken, fingerprints scanned, and paper samples collected under controlled conditions to maintain chain of custody integrity. Following confiscation, the courier was detained and subjected to initial interrogation. Interrogation protocols emphasized procedural rigor and the avoidance of leading questions. The individual disclosed partial operational information, recruitment through an intermediary, basic instructions for handoffs, and limited knowledge of broader organizational objectives. Analysts documented the courier's responses verbatim, noting hesitation, consistency of details, and observable psychological indicators, such as microexpressions, eye movement, and speech cadence. The interrogation revealed limited awareness of the handler. The asset could describe physical characteristics indirectly, tall, medium build, operationally disciplined, but could not provide a name or definitive location. Federal agents cross-referenced these details with known intelligence operatives, personnel records, and prior surveillance observations. Despite the partial disclosure, the handler's identity remained elusive, indicating operational security protocols designed to compartmentalize information. December 16 to 18, 1984, were dedicated to systemic analysis. Agents examined previously collected envelopes, identifying recurring cipher marks, numeric codes, and ink composition variations. Comparative analysis of handwriting, fold patterns, and envelope weight provided additional insight into the operational methodology. Analysts mapped courier routes against city infrastructure, noting timing dependencies, environmental contingencies, and potential observation blind spots. The goal was to reconstruct operational sequences while minimizing risk of exposure or interference. Movement timelines were recorded in precise detail: time of exit from the northern entrance, traversal of corridor sections, stairwell transitions, and approach to drop sites. Each segment was assigned a unique code. Segment A, platform to stairwell. Segment B, stairwell to junction. Segment C, junction to exit. Agents used these codes to identify deviations, estimate predictability, and model future movements. Traffic patterns, delivery vehicle schedules, and pedestrian density were layered into the analysis to anticipate operational windows. By December 19, 1984, federal surveillance had successfully documented multiple complete sequences: courier approach, object placement, retrieval by secondary personnel, and subsequent transport through the corridor. Each sequence was analyzed for variation, potential compromise, and risk mitigation strategies. Analysts noted redundancies built into the operation: multiple couriers, alternative drop locations, and staggered timing designed to obscure predictable patterns from casual observation. Procedural documentation also included asset interrogation summaries. The detained courier provided insight into recruitment processes, selection based on occupational access, minimal training in dead drop techniques, and instructions emphasizing non-interaction with other assets. The individual confirmed communication with an unidentified handler, using subtle signals, coded references, and precise timing instructions. The handler's identity remained outside jurisdictional reach, partially obscured by layered operational security. December 20, 1984, 9 o'clock hours. Federal agents concluded the initial operational analysis phase. Assets had been identified, sequences mapped, and procedural methodologies documented. Surveillance data, courier testimony, and physical evidence established the presence of a deliberate intelligence operation with high levels of compartmentalization. The narrative emphasizes the procedural and observational rigor, noting that while tangible operational elements were captured, the handler, the orchestrator of the broader network, remained unknown, preserving the Cold War ambiguity central to the operation. Section 4 concludes with emphasis on procedural observation and analytical rigor. The federal surveillance operation had successfully documented behavior, identified assets, collected evidence, and reconstructed operational methodology. Yet the broader network remained partially concealed, and the handler eluded identification. Every observation, timestamp, and recorded action contributed to a methodical intelligence framework, reinforcing the documentary tone and establishing the foundation for the final phase: attempted sting, aftermath, and enduring Cold War ambiguity. December 22, 1984, 6:12 hours. Federal counterintelligence agents initiated the first controlled sting operation targeting the coordination network documented over the previous weeks. Based on extensive observation, pattern analysis, and interrogation summaries, analysts had identified a high-probability drop location within the Northern Service Corridor. The objective was procedural: intercept communications or materials from the handler while maintaining surveillance of known assets. All operational actions were meticulously logged, from team positioning to environmental conditions, ensuring complete documentation of timing, personnel placement, and potential contingencies. The controlled dead drop was prepared with precision. A replica envelope, mimicking dimensions and weight of prior packages, was deployed at 6:15 hours, with a subtle pre-recorded signal placed within. Observation teams were positioned along corridors, stairwells, and adjacent transit platforms, each assigned specific zones of coverage. Agents recorded line-of-sight distances, potential blind spots, and optimal angles for visual confirmation without detection. Redundant observation points were established to capture multiple perspectives of any activity at the drop location. By 6:23, the first asset, the previously detained janitor now under controlled release and surveillance, approached the drop site. Movements were consistent with prior observations: measured pace, precise pauses, and glances toward adjacent corridors to detect potential observers. Agents recorded the micro-timing of each action: 6 hours, 23 minutes, and 12 seconds, approach; 6 hours, 23 minutes, and 27 seconds, visual scan; 6 hours, 23 minutes, and 31 seconds, envelope retrieved; 6 hours, 23 minutes, and 35 seconds, retreat from corridor. The procedural precision of these movements indicated training in operational security, confirming intelligence tradecraft methods observed in prior sequences. Unexpectedly, no secondary courier or handler appeared to receive the package. Surveillance teams noted repeated checks of surrounding platforms, stairwells, and adjacent streets. Analysts hypothesized potential deviation in operational pattern. Either the handler had anticipated the interception, or multiple contingency routes existed outside federal observation. At 6:45, the asset returned to a previously documented stairwell junction, pausing briefly, then retracing steps to the northern exit. Agents logged all movement, noting deviation from expected sequences, but confirming envelope retrieval remained consistent with prior behavior. By 7:12, analysts concluded that the handler had successfully avoided the controlled interception. Signals previously detected through microbehaviors and environmental cues, subtle glances, coordinated pauses, and timing deviations, suggested deliberate operational misdirection. Analysts noted that the absence of the handler was itself an indicator of layered tradecraft: multiple potential drop locations, unobservable communication channels, and adaptive timing to evade capture. This outcome, procedural rather than dramatic, marked a partial operational failure. Federal teams shifted focus to asset containment. The mid-level courier previously interrogated was monitored for subsequent activity. Movement patterns indicated continued adherence to prior routes, but with modifications likely informed by awareness of federal surveillance. Analysts documented these alterations, modified approach angles, adjusted pause durations, and variations in envelope handling. The procedural emphasis was on cataloging all deviations to infer the presence of an adaptive network and to refine predictive models for future observation windows. December 23rd to 27th, 1984, were dedicated to post-sting operational analysis. Analysts mapped observed deviations against prior timelines, reconstructing hypothetical network patterns to account for the handler's absence. Each deviation was logged with timestamps, environmental conditions, and personnel interaction details. Analysts examined potential communication signals, brief glances between assets, minor adjustments to envelope placement, and transient objects left along anticipated routes. The subtlety of these indicators underscored the sophistication of operational security, and the layered compartmentalization designed to obscure the handler's identity. During this period, procedural attention turned to asset prosecution. The mid-level courier, detained during prior operations, underwent formal processing, evidence documentation, fingerprinting, and confirmation of prior testimony. Analysts cataloged seized envelopes, noting contents, fold patterns, markings, and potential code sequences. Legal procedures were strictly followed, ensuring that prosecution would proceed on concrete evidence rather than conjecture. The narrative emphasizes procedural neutrality. The courier's prosecution was based on observed behavior and confirmed intelligence documentation. December 28, 1984, 9:17 hours. Analysts conducted a comprehensive review of all operational data collected since initial civilian observation. Surveillance logs, timestamp photography, video feeds, and interrogation transcripts were compiled into a master operational dossier. Analysts noted unresolved threads, unknown handler identity, unobserved secondary couriers, and potential alternative drop locations. Each unresolved element was cross-referenced against historical intelligence operations, revealing patterns consistent with layered Cold War tradecraft, deliberate concealment, minimal exposure of assets, and contingency planning to maintain operational opacity. By January 3, 1985, the federal operation transitioned into a long-term monitoring phase. Active interventions were minimized. Observation continued passively to avoid compromising remaining intelligence. Analysts established periodic check-ins with the civilian observer, integrating continued micro-observations into broader surveillance data. The clerk remained an essential source of behavioral baselines, providing detailed accounts of seemingly minor anomalies that could later inform pattern analysis. The procedural closure of the sting operation highlighted the complexity of Cold War intelligence work. While assets were identified, detained, and prosecuted, the handler remained elusive. Analysts concluded that operational concealment had been deliberately maintained through multi-layered tradecraft, use of unregistered couriers, variable drop points, and adaptive timing sequences. Observations indicated that the handler retained complete operational knowledge while minimizing exposure, consistent with intelligence protocols designed to mitigate risk during periods of heightened counterintelligence activity. Consequences for the detained courier were strictly procedural. Evidence was formally logged, testimony documented, and sentencing conducted according to applicable legal frameworks. Analysts emphasized that, while operational compromise was limited, the broader network remained intact and partially unobservable. Federal records highlighted the need for continued monitoring and cross-referencing of routine municipal activity for anomalous patterns that might indicate residual operational activity. Despite procedural success in asset identification and documentation, the operation concluded with unresolved ambiguity. The handler, never fully identified or apprehended, demonstrated the enduring opacity characteristic of Cold War intelligence operations. Analysts noted that the absence of overt confrontation or violent engagement did not equate to operational failure. Rather, the handler's continued anonymity represented a successful execution of tradecraft. Observations, environmental mapping, and timestamped behavioral documentation underscored the sophistication and subtlety of the network. The narrative closes with reflection on the enduring tension of Cold War espionage. The clerk's initial observation, a metallic glint in a maintenance corridor, catalyzed a federal investigation, surveillance operation, and controlled sting. Yet, the handler's identity, network hierarchy, and operational objectives remained unresolved. Analysts emphasized procedural precision, meticulous documentation, and cautious inference. The night the Cold War shifted, as encoded in code name, broken silence, remained marked by incomplete information, subtle tradecraft, and the persistence of uncertainty. Final observations highlighted enduring ambiguity. Packages continued to appear in predictable patterns, albeit under altered schedules. Assets adapted behaviors in response to surveillance, while unidentified participants remained at large. The operation was quietly archived, evidence cataloged, and procedural reports filed for historical record. the unresolved elements of a case, the elusive handler, the partially mapped network, and the unobserved communications, served as a stark reminder of the inherent uncertainty, procedural complexity, and enduring opacity of Cold War intelligence operations. The last recorded entry from the Federal Dossier, timestamped January 15, 1985, 2347, summarized the operation's outcomes: partial identification of assets, successful documentation of tradecraft sequences, and continued observation of residual activity. Yet it concluded with the acknowledgement that the central orchestrator, the handler, remained outside jurisdiction and beyond identification. The Cold War, in its persistent ambiguity, had preserved the veil of secrecy over the operations observed, ensuring that the events surrounding Codename Broken Silence remained unresolved and partially obscured.